Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast with myself, Ben Scallon, and Jason Osborne. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of the Irish presidential race. You could take that state in many different meanings of the term. We're also going to be talking about the potential for President Bertie Ahern, the cult of personality around Michael D. Higgins, and indeed the state funding of the media. We have more to discuss in that regard. So, Jason, to start off with, I thought it was amusing. I don't think we had discussed this beforehand, but I wanted to throw this at you and see your reaction to the news reports over the last couple of days. First of all, that Fianna Fáil TDs are reportedly gaining an interest in supporting Bertie Ahern to be their candidate, much to the horror of Micheál Martin, who is well known. He's not keen on that prospect at all whatsoever. And as of this morning, we're hearing that Bertie Ahern is considering maybe putting his name forward into the potential pool of candidates because he's hearing, oh, well, look, if there's demand for me, then maybe it'd be worth throwing my hat into the ring. And this is significant because Bertie Ahern rejoined Fianna Fáil just a couple of years ago as an ordinary member, having stepped down as Taoiseach and party leader over a decade ago now. So it looks like he might be gearing up. He at least seems to think that it's an idea worth toying with. What would you think about that?
You see, I find this a really funny one because Bertie Ahern is someone who provokes such strong feelings in so many people who I don't think will take offense if we say are older than us in particular. I know, there are people our age who would have a particularly strong opinion about this, but I would say they're very much in the minority of our sort of, people around our age. And so I can acknowledge, the role he's played in the state and some of the, the contributions he's made and obviously what people point out as failures, but I don't have any particularly strong feelings about him personally. I'm certainly happier, say, to see him go forward than bloody Micheál Martin, who I do have very strong feelings about, given I've been living under his reign on and off for the past couple of years. But I think that yeah, he's one of those people that because we know that a lot of the people who turn out to vote are generally older than us. I think it's generally, homeowners, people on into their 40s, 50s, and 60s who turn out to vote in greater number than people our age and younger. And he's an extraordinarily polarizing figure amongst them. So I don't know whether, Fianna Fáil have been in any sort of way testing the waters and seeing what sort of appetite there would be for Bertie, but I do think that he'll liven up the race. I think that would be guaranteed. I know that I had read something this morning, and at this stage, to be fair, things are moving at a pretty swift pace, so I don't know whether it's updated since then, but I know that there was strong support within Fianna Fáil for Micheál Martin putting himself forward, but that he says he definitely won't be doing that. So if that is indeed the case, I would be much happier, I think, to be honest, to see Bertie put forward by the party than him.
Yeah, I think the odds of Micheál doing it are basically nil. I mean, the risk would be so great, and it's an unnecessary risk because, like I think writing Micheál off would be a mistake. Like, I think he could do well. I think there is a cohort of society who, I mean, like you saw the result that his party got in the last general election. Clearly, he's not unpopular, generally speaking. His approval rating is decent and so on. Whether it should be or not is another question. I'll leave that up to the view of the individual viewer, but that is the world we live in. And so I think it would be kind of an unnecessary gamble for him to potentially face that humiliation, as it would be, by the way, for Mary Lou McDonald. Sinn Féin refused to rule out the possibility of Mary Lou running as the candidate. I don't know why they would do that, given that if she loses, she's basically forced at that point to bow out of the leadership position. You can't credibly lead the party, I would feel, given that the electorate has rejected you personally. That's just not a good look as the party leader. So, yeah, Bertie, I think, would certainly resurrect a lot of
Mm.
problems. Like the strength, what Fianna Fáil would want to do is they would want to remind everybody about his role in the peace process and the Good
Yeah.
Friday Agreement. And given that, talks of a united Ireland are on the horizon, they would try to really
Especially
emphasize
if
that.
I could just interject at this present moment, obviously with all of the sort of harried international diplomacy going on, particularly in relation to tariffs and what's going on with Ireland, I think they could very much make a convincing case that what you need right now in the presidential office is an experienced statesman, which he obviously is, whether people like him or not, he is.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. And I think this is not an endorsement at all of Bertie Ahern or any candidate. I'm not trying to like big him up or something like that. But the impression I get, having done vox pops about this, having spoken to people on the street, asking them what do you think of a potential Bertie Ahern presidency,
Mm.
the vibe I get is that the general public, a significant cohort of them, think that he's a bit of a cheeky kind of lad that is, he's got his faults, he's got his failings, but like I think there's a lot of people who would think that you wouldn't mind having a pint with him or that kind of a way, or
Mm.
he's got sort of a very like um he's got a very Irish charm about him. I think I'm not saying that's my view. I'm saying I think there is a cohort of society who feel that way about him. And so when it comes to diplomacy and which is basically all that the president is he's a big diplomat, is he'd be going around talking to Americans, and I think
Mm.
there's probably some people who would make the assessment that that would all go down well internationally, and that he'd know how to talk to people. But of course, it would raise the specter of the Mahon Tribunal, which Fianna Fáil had spent its entire uh, political life for the last 10 years trying to get away from. It would
Mm.
bring up the crash. It would bring up all of these things that they just do
Yeah.
not want to discuss. You can imagine the memes, the no bank account memes, the cashless society, etc. So that's not a conversation you want to have, and so I don't know that they're going to decide that that's worth it ultimately, bringing all of that stuff up again.
I mean, I do think, as I say, whatever passions, people who were, as I say, I think primarily people who were tuned into politics back when Bertie was in office, may have. I do think the politics, and I mean, you can see this concretely in terms of the approval ratings of the parties and a lot of the figures in office at the moment, that they are just on average lower than they were 15, 20 years ago. So I think it's fair to say that politics in Ireland is at a very low ebb. And I do think that as a result, they sort of see, reaching into the past as a viable option for pulling forth a successful presidential candidate. I know they've also been talking, there also been talk, I should say, of although much less speculation around this figure than there is around Bertie, but speculation around pulling Enda Kenny out for it. I haven't heard. I that was just idle speculation. I doubt, anything will come of that. I certainly haven't heard anything from him, nor does anyone seem to have. But I do think that it's no wonder that we're seeing a lot of reaching back into, former statesmen for this particular task, with the exception obviously of Sinn Féin, who are considering their current leader for it apparently. But I just think it's no surprise given how toxic politics has become in many ways. I mean, even amongst people who are sort of fairly centrist or fairly, sensible, for want of how they would describe themselves, to put it that way. Um, there's very little appetite for any of the people who are currently in office, or any of the people that they might be inclined to suggest, because they just seem to be completely out of touch with the population, as the referendums last year indicated.
I feel like Heather Humphreys, who seems to be running away with the Fine Gael nomination, I feel like she is a strong contender. Again, not because I support her, not because I would want to see her win, but when you just look at the situation dispassionately, she was Minister for Social Protection, which
Mm.
effectively means you're the free money fairy. She spent years. And also to boot, rural and community development. So that means you're traveling all over the country And most people's perception of you is, aren't you that lady who shows up with bags of money and invests
Yeah,
in football pitches and community centers and things and local gyms?
yeah.
So she's known, and you can't really mess that up. Like, to my knowledge, so far as I recall, she didn't really have any scandals. Although I don't know how you could have a scandal. How do you mess up giving out free
Do I
money?
recall?
So
Do I recall correctly? I didn't look it up before this. I should have that she was the sort of director for the referendum campaigns last year. I mean,
yeah,
that if that is the case, that hasn't been particularly analyzed in light of this because I mean that was a pretty major failure. If so, I'll pull it up here now in a minute, but I do think that was the case.
yeah, it was. She was the director of elections for the referendum. So
Exactly.
that's not a good look. Although the entire political system was so implicated in that, I feel like the blame will be smeared around, and she will get
Mm.
a relatively small portion of it. Again, with the like, I don't think. I mean, it will be the tactic to pin it on her entirely and act like that was her entire legacy. But I don't know how effective that will be. And the other benefit or the other strong point she has going for her from the perspective of Fine Gael is she's a Presbyterian. She's from a border county. Like her dad was in the Orange Order, and her grandfather signed the Solemn League and Covenant. So, given that she comes from that community, again, when it comes to the United Ireland question and trying to unify the country, I think they'll try to play that up as much as possible because Fine Gael has inherited the bad PR of being the party that tried to commemorate the RIC and the Black and
Yeah.
Tans and doing all that stuff. So I think there's a lot of people who view them as kind of anti uh, anti United Ireland or opposed to the country's historic legacy. So by putting forward
Mm.
somebody who's strong when it comes to the unifying the country question, I think that'll probably help her.
Well, what if she gets the nomination? You would wonder whether that'll, if indeed that is sort of the angle that they go with, and as you say, it seems like a credible bet that they may well, whether they would kind of push that would push Sinn Féin to, maybe push Mary Lou forward. I mean, I still think it's very unlikely, but I know obviously Sinn Féin would have their eyes on being the ones responsible for reunification and whatnot. So, it's definitely getting more interesting and heating up. I mean, on the sort of alternatives front, it's still as dire as it was when we last spoke about this, probably a couple of weeks, if not a month or two ago. I mean, you've got since we last spoke about Gareth Sheridan coming into the race, who I hope I'm not doing the man wrong if I say doesn't particularly seem to stand for this, that, or the other. There's not too much enthusiasm for his campaign. I think he did come into this a little bit like the inexperienced greenhorn and sort of expect to be received enthusiastically as a young person running for office, where immediately the media launched into here's his company, here's you guys might want to have a look at this aspect of what he's done or that aspect of what he's done. I don't think he was prepared for that, and I think the enthusiasm was sort of fairly quickly fizzled out. I had in the past week I've seen very little about him on social media. And I feel like if he doesn't manage to keep that buzz going, there won't be too much else going for him because he is an unknown in Irish political circles.
You know what's one of the problems for him and for all the other candidates really is
Mm.
you know as well as I do that we're in August. The news is absolutely dead. There's almost nothing happening. We're well and truly in the throes of silly season. And so journalists kind of have nothing to do. If you announce now, as I'm going to run for president during this time of year, all they can do really is look into your past
Scoop.
and tear you apart.
Yeah.
Like they're looking for a story. So I believe I saw one story that was something to do with like a planning objection that his mom had put in. I'm not even exaggerating. Like his mother
Mm.
objected to some like development somewhere and they made that a news story and he was having to defend that. Like literally they will find someone who you poked in the eye when you were in preschool and they'll make that a thing. So the timing, and actually, by the way, that's part of the argument I've heard because a lot of the Fianna Fáil backbenchers are getting very frustrated that they haven't selected a candidate yet, and they're kind of saying, "Here, Michal, what's the hold up?" I was speaking to some of them on the phone, and the reasoning that I've heard is they're going to wait until silly season is over or it's about to be over. And that way, when you announce your candidate, they're not immediately just a sitting duck who's getting torn to shreds for the remainder of the summer. And you can actually give them some breathing room. So it's actually
September is the time to slip in your seediest candidate.
yeah,
It
exactly.
is
Yeah.
sometimes that you Fianna Fáil put forth some guy's got an eye patch on, a big scar on his cheek.
Yeah. Or indeed Dirty Bertie. Yeah, that's when he goes
Yeah.
flying in there.
Yeah.
Don't give them time to react. Don't let them know your next move. Um, but yeah, you're right. Like your man Gareth Sheridan, like all we know about him is he was nominated or proposed to be nominated by Sharon Keoghan, and then he immediately threw her under the bus and said, "Oh, I don't really support her or anything." And it's like not a great start, I would have thought. I really
Mm,
couldn't tell you what his philosophy or belief system is, except the fact that he said that he's neither right wing nor left wing. So again, I feel like we're at a stage where no one has any appetite for that. I think we've talked about this on a previous episode that there are people who are left wing, there are people who are right wing, there are people who are liberal, there are people who are conservative. Nobody wants you to come down the middle and be like, oh, yeah, I believe a
mm.
bit of this and a bit of that. Like, that's how you get absolutely nowhere. If he had come out guns blazing and said, and like if he had pitched himself as the outsider tech businessman who's going to smash the political establishment and smash the media and tell journalists where to get off, and you people and your cozy cartel have had a monopoly on the political system for long enough, and now it's time for new ideas and so on. That would have been the message. But I feel like he's trying to be too nice and be all things to all people, which just ends up making him nothing to anybody.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And it's also, I mean, there was also speculation. I think it was obviously since our last episode came out last Monday, obviously there was some speculation about Maria Steen when she issued a statement in response to something Senator Sharon Keoghan had said about, candidates that she would support if they had come forward. And she listed amongst those, I don't have them all to hand, but it was certainly Gareth Sheridan, whom she had done, Nick Delahanty, Declan Ganley, I believe, was among them as well, and Maria Steen. And Maria Steen obviously issued a statement afterwards saying that, paraphrasing essentially, but that she was flattered, but that she doesn't have a presidential campaign. I mean, I think it was noted that she didn't explicitly, deny an interest in it or something like this. But I do feel like she, particularly given her prominent role in the referendum last year, may well be well positioned for something like that. Just a lot of the issue for independents at the moment is they're not really putting themselves forward, or if they are, they're not doing so particularly effectively. Like, you really need to be working the phones, you need to be onto, the county councils or these public representatives. And it seems like that has to be your entire mission between now and, nomination time, essentially. So there's definitely a few more interesting names in the mix currently across the spectrum, I would say, but still, for those who wouldn't be inclined to vote for a Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil candidate, you're sort of left looking at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, I think there's a very realistic prospect that when the election comes around, there will be nobody outside of the mainstream parties who is on offer to vote for, which I think is a real travesty and a tragedy, really, given that,
Mm.
like the last couple of presidential elections, at least one of the big parties has not really participated. They've been sort of agnostic and they've allowed
Mm.
the things to fall where they may. Like, I don't think any of them competed against Higgins last time around, so it was sort of an open race. Whereas now that they are competing, and we have this absurd system where you have to gain the approval of the people you're running against in order to get on the ballot, which is just madness. Like, I completely understand and agree with the idea that there should be a barrier to entry for the presidency because it's a national election involving 5 million people, or actually 6 or 7 million if you include Northern Ireland. And so, given that you have all of these potential people who could run, if you had no barrier to entry, then you'd get the ballot paper being 100 names long. It'd be trailing out the door because you'd get every moron with notions putting themselves forward, and it'd be a total waste of time. So there has to be some barrier to entry. I get that. But the bar is so ludicrously high. Like, I feel like, for example, why do you have to get 4 county councils? So you're telling me if Dublin County Council thinks that you're a valid candidate, that's not enough? No, you need 3 more on top of that. Like, that's ludicrous. Or indeed 20 members of the Oireachtas. So if 10 members of the Oireachtas were to say, yeah, we think this person is credible, that's not enough, So I think reducing the threshold would be greatly beneficial to our democracy and society overall.
Yeah, I could certainly see cause for reducing the threshold without that becoming overly, lax and just, say, allowing anyone who has a sort of whim in this direction to enter into the race. Like my wife coming into me, sitting here on my wife beater in the living room, eating my beans on toast and saying, not consider maybe running for the presidency. And it's like, sure, yeah, go on. I'll throw my name into the ring. It would still keep out people like me, but you would still, it would be a little bit more realistic for, those who are of goodwill and would genuinely be able to put together some sort of campaign, but who might find the current bar to be prohibitive. But it is certainly opening, and there's like a couple more names. I mean, a couple more. I mean, there's also some people who, were mentioned earlier on in speculation who kind of just fizzled out altogether. Like, but maybe it's not fair to put one of them into fizzled out altogether, but Michael Flatley, obviously. It's really funny to me at this stage that it obviously, and we spoke about it before because it was a news story and everyone was chatting about it. Conor McGregor's presidential bid, if you can even put it that way, given that, as you say, with the bar being what it is, there's absolutely no hope in hell of him securing a nomination to run for it. So the landscape has definitely changed for this, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it goes. I did want us to talk about the man currently in the office today, because there was a very interesting Irish Independent article over the weekend that I think had you particularly impressed, Ben.
Oh yes, absolutely. I couldn't have agreed more. I'm not sure how many people saw this Irish Independent article. I don't have it here in front of me. Maybe you do, but
I can pull it up.
In effect,
Yeah,
the summation of the article, it was written by it's an opinion piece in the Irish Independent, and the argument is effectively that Michael D. Higgins has done the presidency a disservice, not because he did anything wrong, but because he's so phenomenally perfect and superhuman that it's too tough of an act to follow, and anyone who comes after him will be atrocious by comparison. He's ruined us as a country because we just can't ever appreciate. Like, it'd be better if he never came down from Mount Olympus, because then we wouldn't know what we were missing. That's the problem here. Sorry, if you want to maybe read some of the choice excerpts that we have.
Yeah, I pulled it up here. So it was by Aidan O'Connell, and the headline on it was "Breakups are never easy, and the one we're facing in November will be brutal." Oh, gosh, you could read the whole article. Where the hell would you start? I'll read one section from the. Oh my gosh, I'm like flicking through it here. It's unbelievable. Here's one paragraph up near the front of the article. President Michael D. Higgins is the boyfriend you just can't quit. No matter how many times your friends have warned you that the end is near, you ignore it. There's a car parked out front, he's in the back seat, and we're all waiting to drive off into the sunset with a power ballad as the soundtrack. Together forever, that's how it should be. But alas, President Higgins has found another to dance slow set with, and their name is retirement. So, while listeners ponder the image of walking out to a car and finding Michael D. Higgins sprawled across the back seat in a romantic context, I'll scroll down to the end of the article and read just it's an astonishing paragraph. And I mean, I know publications have the freedom to, again, it's a sort of opinion piece. They have the possibility of publishing all sorts of opinions, but I think the fact that there's even this opinion out there is testament to something about Irish society. So here's another paragraph from down the end of the article. We are deeply unhealthily attached to one man. We forgive all frustrations or misgivings because we believe he loves us unconditionally. Such unwavering fidelity means we're hurtling toward what may be the most devastating, crushing, brutal breakup of our lives. No one can save us, not even Michael D. He has ruined us. He has ruined us for every other president. No matter how many accolades or approvals they earn, they will all fall short. They just aren't him. This may well have been the most intoxicating and ultimately toxic partnership we ever agreed to. So you hear that cracking noise? Yeah, that's the hearts of a nation splitting in two. Like, that's genuinely, it's not an exaggeration to say that's like North Korea level stuff. Like, really and truly.
And you know what? I want to be totally fair and like let's give loads of benefit of the doubt and say, look, okay, it was tongue in cheek, it was meant to be funny. Like
Satirical.
I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but clearly this person thinks very highly of Michael D. Higgins, and that's why this article was written. Like clearly, it might be a slight embellishment or for comedic effect, but evidently this was their true feelings to a greater or lesser extent, and so what I couldn't help but think when I was reading this was we often hear from Irish media the fact that the MAGA movement in America is a cult, and that Donald Trump is like a cult leader, and
Mm.
that his followers are just almost they almost have a religious zeal in how much they support him, and that just shows how deluded and deranged they are, basically. And I think about Michael D. Higgins and the fact that I don't know how many people have gone into a bookshop and you see these illustrated children's books about
Huh.
Michael D. And like the president loses his glasses, and it's about him going on an adventure to find his glasses so that he can sign a bill or whatever. And like this is used in schools across the country. And there's another one about his cat or whatever.
Yeah.
So he's like a beloved cartoon character that children are taught about, and so on and so forth. And I think, okay, like I obviously don't support Michael D. Higgins because I'm totally. I think his climate preaching is tedious and hypocritical, given the amount of flights he takes here, there, and everywhere. I think his trying to link like horrible persecution of Christians in the third world to climate change is in extremely poor taste. He's a socialist, etc., etc. Like, there's so many things that I don't like about him. But take me out of it. Take my personal views totally aside. What is so special and unique about this guy? Even if you are a liberal, you say, okay, I like that he talks about foreign affairs and the Middle East and things like that. Name an Irish politician that doesn't talk about the foreign affairs in the Middle East. They all pontificate about those things. That's not unique to
Mm.
him. Mary McAleese does that. Mary Robinson does that. You say, oh, what about he talks about climate change. They all talk about climate change. Sure, Eamon Ryan does that more than he does, and a lot of people gave him a massive kicking in his party at the very last general election. So you go down the list of unique accomplishments that you can attribute to this man. Like, what has he done to make him so special, even from a liberal perspective? And I've never heard anyone able to articulate what makes him the best thing since sliced bread. He is an absolutely bog standard garden variety product of Ireland's official political class that has nothing unique to recommend him. He writes poetry that everyone says is good, but no one can name a single poem he's written or quote from it. Like no one knows anything about this guy's work. Uh, I'd very much love to hear what the hell these people are talking about when they say that he is the God King himself.
I would push back on one thing, Ben. You said no one knows anything about his work. I know one thing, and that's that it's incredible. I'd seen that, speaking of his poetry, um, and again, yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of aspects of. I'm not a particular fan of our current president. I think that he pontificates, and it's quite clear that he sort of has a value set that is very much in keeping with everything modern, and isn't again it doesn't push back in any sort of substantive way. It's not particularly insightful. Um, I think part of the reason he's so popular is because he is ultimately this figure that remains very popular in our culture, even if it is neglected, which is the kindly old grandfather. I do think that, like, whereas, say, the father figure, just sort of generally speaking, has become a symbol of sort of being domineering and authoritarian and things like that. The sort of kindly grandfather, even if a lot of people, I would say, probably neglect their grandparents these days, hasn't really gone out of fashion. People are still very fond of that kind of kindly old man who has kind of cute characteristics and doesn't really get in anyone's way, but is always just sort of encouraging. I feel like, if I could put it this way, he was kind of the perfect grandfather to modern Ireland in 2025. If you like Ireland in 2025, you'll probably like him and find him endearing. If you don't like Ireland, and I draw a distinction here, I said the direction of Ireland in 2025, because obviously I love Ireland, but I disagree with its direction presently rather than presidently.
Well, presidently
You're,
too, to be fair.
yeah, presently too. You're probably not going to be a huge fan of his, which, as I say, neither you nor I are. But what I do take, yeah, much like yourself, what I take huge issue with is this fawning over him. And it's a problem that just sort of uh, cuts across the media in so many directions. And indeed, it's why Gript exists, which is there was too much of a permissive attitude to the political class, too much, sort of saw an article in the Irish Independent a couple of weeks back where they had an interview with Simon Harris, who, even before the Harvey Chirac campaign, was facing a bunch of difficulties, and they had some interview with him where he's sitting on a rock by the seaside, and he's like, I can't remember, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's something like, I couldn't exactly, call I do the grocery shop, but I couldn't exactly call myself the squeezed middle. And again, it was this kind of softball type interview with him, and I feel like that just it either ranges from softball questioning up to open adulation and fawning, and it extends across the board. It's like it's journalism, it's civil society organizations. To go back to what we began with about his poetry, like I'll read this is a really short article, so I don't mind reading the whole thing. It was just in RTE, and it just struck me when it came out for how ridiculous it is. It was uploaded on the 18th of July, so just a couple of weeks ago. President Michael D. Higgins to release album of poetry. And as I say, it's only a really short article, so I'll just read the whole thing so listeners can get a sense of the tone of it. President Michael D. Higgins is set to release an album of poetry later this year. The spoken word album, called Against All Certainty, will feature 10 original poems set to music from Miles O'Reilly. The album was recorded in Áras on Oak Tyrone and will be put out by Claddagh Records. President Higgins has published 4 books of poetry. This will be the first recorded project in the spoken word. Now, here we go. Those behind the project said listeners can expect to find themselves fully transposed into the incredibly interesting life and times of the poet before he became Ireland's president, from childhood to adulthood. A series of videos will also be released as part of the project, which, among other things, will depict the, quote, hardship of the president's early life. Against all certainty, okay, yeah, it just has the details of the release, but it's like the incredibly interesting life and times of the poet. It's like we're already giving him like mythic status. It's crazy stuff, and it's that tendency in Irish media that I detest more than anything, really.
And like I don't like any Irish president in my lifetime. That's just my personal view. We're all entitled to our perspectives. That's mine. But like putting on my liberal hat, where I look at things through their perspective, Mary Robinson was the first female president of Ireland. That's a huge accomplishment, regardless of what you think about her or her views or whatever. Like that's something that can go in the history books as
Yeah.
an achievement that you can't take away from her. Mary McAleese was the first president from Northern Ireland. She was born in Belfast, and she did a lot of work when the peace process was still in its infancy and was very fragile. She was,
She'll likely be the first pope too, just add.
yeah, indeed, absolutely. But she had all this like outreach to communities across the border to try and foster reconciliation and all that. Again, whatever you think of Mary McAleese, that's an accomplishment that you can attribute to her. This guy, I know I'm just repeating myself, but like he's literally done nothing to warrant the level of support that he has. And in fact, like in the article, the independent article that was praising him, it said that he has near universal acceptance and love, or words to that effect. His approval rating as he's about to leave office is something like 64%, which obviously is a majority. That's pretty good. You know, you'd like to have an approval rating like that in politics. Until you
Yeah.
consider the fact that McAleese, when she was leaving office, had an approval rating of 92%, and Robinson was 93%. So the point is, you took on an totally apolitical office. It's not supposed to be controversial. You're not passing legislation, or you're not drafting legislation that's going to divide the nation. You're not responsible for scandals and problems. So, really, as a president, if you've been elected, it's very hard to be hated because you would have to go out of your way to do something that would annoy people. This guy managed to alienate about a third of the electorate, which neither of his two predecessors did before him. He was probably the most divisive president we've ever had. And yet, apparently, that constitutes universal support. The only people he has universal support with are journalists who kiss his ass relentlessly, while the rest of the public, I'm not going to say the public dislikes him. Obviously, they don't. Obviously, he won a majority both times, and he still has a majority approval rating. But I think the public's view is a lot more nuanced and mixed than you're going to find in any mainstream newsroom.
The best metric we're going to have for this is how many copies of his poetry album are sold. For one thing, they're probably going to sell like hotcakes, especially if they come out when they're coming out. Released on 5th of September, just 2 weeks away or so, but just in time for Christmas anyway. So that's the best metric. But a curious thing about the presidency I find is how sort of yeah, I suppose I could say that it's not overstating it to say how kind of radical a lot of the figures who come to the Irish presidency are. In that now Mary Robinson and Mary McAleese possibly weren't overly radical in office at the time, but since they've left office, they've both more or less taken up sort of activistic roles. Like Mary Robinson is on the sort of climate campaign trail non-stop. I mean, she seems to be of a level of commitment that she just sort of just stops short of gluing herself to the tarmac at Dublin Airport or something. Whereas Mary McAleese has turned her gaze on the Catholic Church and very often is speaking and writing about reform in the Catholic Church and how much that's required. I know she always had an interest in that, say, but that's sort of the only way that I come across her these days. So it'll be very interesting to see if Michael D. Higgins, who, as you note, was much more outspoken and much more controversial during his time in office already, if he decides to turn his hand to activism too once he gets out of office, because I'm sure there are many in Ireland who would probably say he turned his hand to it while he was in office, but it's just a curious trend and quality of the past couple of presidents we've had.
I mean, that trend, which you're absolutely right, is clearly evident, would seem to indicate that Catherine Connolly would be in a good spot for continuing in the same tradition. And by the way, I kind of like Catherine Connolly. I'm not criticizing her. I think that she has some things to recommend her. I don't know that I would vote for her, given my number one personally. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking off my neutral journalist hat and putting on my ordinary guy with opinions hat, I don't know that she'd be my first choice. But uh, yeah, she is clearly of the left. She's being put forward as a left unification candidate by PBP and the like. So that kind of tells you the gene pool
Yeah.
she's in ideologically. So yeah, that would seem to indicate that she's probably got a reasonable shot, you would think.
You would think so, but in keeping with, because we've been discussing a good bit about the media climate and the way it makes this particular uh, environment or climate possible, where we discuss presidents and politicians in this way. We did also want to discuss today media funding, state media funding most specifically. Um, because I did a couple of articles last week. It's nothing new, it was something that's been announced previously, but I noted that there was a new level of detail that could be gone into in two different ways. So, for background context for people, um, it was announced back in February that Comisiún na Món, which is obviously the state media regulator, was going to be dispersing 5.7 million euro in taxpayer funds to media organizations in the country under two schemes. There is the local democracy reporting scheme, which kind of is as it sounds. It's like reporting on local civic life and things like that. And then there's the courts reporting scheme, which is going towards, covering what's going on in the courts around the country. And it was really interesting because when that funding was announced, I saw it, obviously having a keen interest in Comisiún na Món, and I had a look at the successful applicants PDF that was released. And I noted at the time in an article that I wrote about it that you couldn't see precisely how that 5.7 million was broken up and who you could see who it was going to, but you couldn't see how much they'd all received. And I mean, I had a look there last week and I found that you could now see how much each organization had received. So I don't know why it wasn't included in there in the first place, but anyway, it wasn't, and now it is. So I decided, well, okay, even though that came out a couple of months ago, it's still worth an article because certainly very few media organizations in the country are going to report on it, given that many of them are in receipt of this money. So I wrote an article about this, and the total amount of funding came to 5,680,222 euro. That went to describe the media organizations that people will be most familiar with first, the national media outlets. The one that received the most money was the Irish Independent, and it's sort of assorted regional publications because it sort of belongs to a group, and that taken together received 337,000 euro, 337,714 euro. So that's a lot of money for a newspaper. Like, having worked in media for a couple of years now, it's like the average journalist salary is anywhere between 30,000 and probably anywhere between 25,000 euro and 40,000 euro. And 40,000 euro will be the upper end of kind of like a journalist salary before you start getting into sort of editorial positions and things like that. So that's enough to fund a number of journalists, which indeed it did, because not long after the funding was announced, there was an announcement from Irish Independent's owner, which I can never pronounce, Media House, which owns Irish Independent and a number of those regional titles. It announced they were hiring 17 new journalists for the publication, which is like no small number. That's a lot of journalists. It's a lot of content. Like, Gript has much fewer journalists, and we managed to put out a lot of content. So they received the most, as I say, 337,000 euro. They're nearly 338,000 euro. The next national one, I won't go through all of them because there's a lot of them, but the next was the Journal. On a national level, that is, which was offered a total of 130,000 euro. Then you had the Irish Examiner, which was offered 129,000. Then you had the Herald, which was offered a total of 117,000 euro. Those are the national titles that were in there. As I noted, to be fair to them on this occasion, leaving aside any other funding they may or may not have received, the Irish Times wasn't included in this list, nor were any of the Irish dailies, nor was the Sun. But there were a bunch of regional papers of some esteem that received a lot of money as well, like the Anglo Celt received 192,000 euro, the Mayo News, and again, these are really regional papers. Like, you're not going to be reading the Mayo News outside of Mayo. Received 177,000 euro. The Southern Star received 175,000. The list goes on, and people can read it in an article on Gript currently. I'll stop speaking now in a second, but as I say, this does have, practical implications, because I wrote another article then last week, which I headlined "The State Shouldn't Be Paying for These Articles," where there's no centralized collection point for articles that have been funded by Comisiún na Món schemes. The only way to find them, as far as I can tell, is to go through all of these publications that received this funding and have a look. And I did. Obviously, there's no way of knowing whether you've done a conclusive job because there's no centralized place that you can check that against. So I just had a look through some of the publications anyway and noted some of the dodgier articles. There were some that were completely standard and run of the mill, like talking about this or that community development, which, I wouldn't say the state should be funding that, but anyway, it's not the most sort of offensive thing, the state article that the state could produce, but there were a lot of really dodgy articles that were being funded, because you would look at the bottom of the article and it would have the tagline, something like funded by the local democracy reporting scheme. And just to give a couple of the headlines that some of these articles that were funded, it was Limerick speaks out on far right and rise of coordinated vigilantism. Tensions rise during anti-immigration protest in Galway. Wexford councillor hits out at Aintu colleagues' iPass centre speech with a quote: "We have to be careful not to fan the flames of fascism," etc., etc. And many of these articles had they were completely one-sided, where you had a limp acknowledgement that they had contacted such and such a sort of concerned organization for comment, as like a citizens organization for comment, but didn't get it. And then in the meantime, they have like 4 or 5 quotes from this left-wing activist, that left-wing activist, this left-wing politician, and loads of things like that. So even though, as I say, I don't know if I didn't, I certainly don't think I did an exhaustive job, and I've no idea how many more articles like that are out there. The fact that there's any out there that have been funded by the state is hugely troubling. And I think that it's just the latest confirmation that this is a really, really bad idea.
And if people want to check out any of that reporting and read more about it, you can do so on gript.ie, wherein Jason has written extensively about this. And hopefully you can find that edifying and investigate even further. And by the way, and as always, we have to remind people that Gript does not receive 1 red cent of government funding. Yes. We never have, and we never will. And for that reason, we rely entirely on the support and the generous donations of people like yourself, which helps us to maintain our independence and to keep the lights on. So with that said, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch you all next week at the next episode. God bless.
God bless.